I'm glad I've now seen this classic episode of Doctor Who. Are you happy I'm glad? The Happiness Patrol. Oh, classic Doctor Who time. And you know what? This is midterms in America. It's elections. And it seemed like a good time to take a look at probably one of the most deeply, overtly political stories that honestly Doctor Who might ever have done, but especially classic era. And I'm now very adamantly going to point at this to anybody who tries to tell me that Doctor Who didn't used to be political, which I already knew. I did a video years and years ago talking about that. It's a little hard for me to watch now, but you can check it out if you feel like it. But wow, this thing is not subtle at all. Like, to the point that I'm kind of shocked they got away with it. Now, I suppose you could say it's subtle insofar as they don't literally say exactly who it is they are taking shots at, but I have a hard time believing that anyone who had any understanding and even the slightest sense of what was going on in UK politics at the time this aired didn't know what this story was doing. 'Cause dang, and we'll get to all that. But first of all, let's start with the fact this is a 7th Doctor and Ace pairing. So we're already off to a good start because, boy, do I love the 7th Doctor and Ace. They're one of the best Doctor and companion pairings. Like, if I were to try and sort out some of the best of all time, it's the 2nd Doctor and Jamie. It's the 10th Doctor and Donna. It is the 6th Doctor and Evelyn Smythe. That's a Big Finish companion if you don't listen to those. And it's the 7th Doctor and Ace. I should come up with one more that I think is a perfect pairing so I can actually have a top 5. But I've got a top 4, and this is right up there. They're so good together. So I'm already in for a good time based on that alone. But we get into this, and they arrive on a planet that is under a very strong-handed authoritarian rule. And that is ruled by someone who is just meant to evoke Margaret Thatcher. That's just what's going on. Like, they're not necessarily visually coding Helen A as Margaret Thatcher. She doesn't look like her. And like the whole thing is done up in big, bright colors, pink wigs and really overdone makeup to the point that I actually wonder if the video game We Happy Few took the painted on happy faces from this, because not every character has them, but a few members of the Happiness Patrol have very much that white painted happy face on. But anyways, that was just something that occurred to me while I was watching it. But, they don't necessarily look like the British authorities, the British government, the British police. And she doesn't necessarily look like Margaret Thatcher, but everything about how she handles things, everything about claiming we're just taking the things to make everybody happy, when the reality is to make only the people who I consider count happy. And anyone who does not count is referred to as things like a drone, a killjoy, referred to as lesser. The manner in which the clampdown on protests, the degree to which she just puts herself out there very flatly, being all friendly, being all like, oh, yes, this is what is best for all, when it is clearly best for actually almost nobody. This is another thing, in addition to Andor, which I've been doing reviews on, where it gets the fact that in an authoritarian system, nobody's happy. Even the people in power, even the people who are in positions that they are not being directly oppressed, is still unhappy. But in this particular system, they have to act as if they're happy. Because the instant you appear to not be happy, well, you're a killjoy. And it's basically swap out happiness for patriotism. And it pretty much maps pretty well. Like, not the extent. Like, I don't mean to imply that Thatcher was having people disappeared and executed. I wouldn't put it past her, but I'm not actually saying that that's what happened. But in terms of the general attitude of, if you claim that anything is not great, that it's not perfect, You are inherently a problem, a hazard. You should not be heard. You should not be seen. You should be clamped down on. And that is how Thatcher's government treated basically anybody who said, hey, the country's actually kind of screwed up right now. Yeah, it's brutal. It is brutally pointed about all of this. And like I said, it is sort of reformatted into a sci-fi setting where the crime is simply failing to be happy. But again, overall, everything about the let's gussy everything up and put all the focus, all the news coverage, all the announcements about how wonderful everything is. And even like when announcements come over the public address system saying that like there's a riot, they end with things like happiness will prevail because it's mantric. It has to be. They have to hammer these points because if it lets up for even a second, people are gonna fight back, and they already are. So it's really, really pointed, and it's really effective. Honestly, it is a brutal takedown of the Thatcher government. Again, to a degree that I am shocked they got away with. Like, I feel like somebody at the BBC didn't get it, because it feels like something somebody, should have stopped. And I don't mean should have as if they shouldn't have allowed it, but like in terms of the fact that the BBC is publicly funded and is kind of an extension of the government in many ways, the fact that none of them saw this and went, wait a minute, is kind of like, wow, you really just slipped through the cracks there. Or maybe there was just more respect for the autonomy of the creative side of things at the time. I don't know, but boy, oh boy, this is, as I said, possibly the most openly, fiercely political episode of Doctor Who that I've seen, period. Like classic or modern. And even if you don't necessarily want to map it onto Thatcher directly, which I don't know how you could possibly decouple those ideas, but even if you're not going to do that, it is clearly a very harsh takedown of authoritarianism as a mentality. This isn't just a case of, there's one person at the top who's a brutal ruler of some kind. Because Doctor Who's done that before. There are times when that's come up in one form or another. It's not just about one person. It's about the system that has been put in place. It's about how nobody can trust anybody. You can't confide in anybody, because what if they report you? What if they work for the government? And it is really not just taking down like, oh, this is ruled by someone mean. Like, no, this is a takedown of the entire system that is on display here. And again, exaggerated science fiction kind of take on this sort of system, but like it is absolutely making comments about systemic oppression, systemic authoritarianism, fascism, basically. It's taking aim at that, even if you're going to try and argue with me. It doesn't necessarily have to be about Thatcher. Like, it is. Like, it just is. But even if you're not gonna go that far, you cannot deny how political this thing is. So this has unfortunately become a bit of a misunderstood episode, or at least a wrongly maligned episode, and largely because of one specific element that I do need to address, and that is the character of the Candyman. The Candyman is admittedly an area where the forcefully overly joyous aesthetic that otherwise very much works, where like everything has to be bright colors. If you're even seen out at night wearing black, you're assumed to be a depressed downer of a person, and you're a killjoy, and we got to deal with you. So like everything being in bright pink and all these exaggerated colors, it all fits. And so within that mentality, the Candyman makes sense. But unfortunately, the practicality of trying to bring what he is, which is an android literally built out of candy, yeah, it's a bit laughable. And there's a number of specific details that don't help. The constantly swirling eyes were probably a step too far. The fact that he doesn't just look like candy, but is literally made of candy, to the point that the Doctor is able to melt his feet to the floor by just messing with the confectionery component of what, make up his feat. It is admittedly a bit of a step too far. And I was going to say I understand. Like, I kind of understand why something like the Candyman becomes such a point of mockery that people disregard the entire episode. But I really feel that that's doing this a disservice. I'm not going to stand up for the Candyman necessarily, but I am going to say that if you think that ruins this episode, given that he is a secondary antagonist at most, then I think you have failed to grasp what this is doing. I don't think the Candyman is any more damaging than any other poorly executed creature that Doctor Who has ever had. He just happened to be poorly executed in a way that's a bit more just cartoonish, I suppose, than maybe what Doctor Who fans were used to as the more standard kind of wonkiness. What's actually kind of funny to me is looking at the Candyman, people will probably look at that and go, oh God, what was the budget on this thing? He actually, for what I think the concept is flawed. For what the concept is, I think he actually looks pretty decent. And more to the point, the Candy Kitchen, which is kind of his lair, is actually a really impressive set. There's like so many details of things and pipes and things actually actively flowing through the pipes. And it's a pretty impressive set. But where the budgetary limitations actually stand out to me more is where we have these announcements or these discussions about protesters, riots, revolution that we never see. It's happening just over there, just off camera, or the crowd just dispersed just recently, just before the scene started, so we don't have to pay for lots of extras. That's not an immersion breaking thing. That's kind of charming. That's part of classic Who charm, at least for me. This whole thing of they have to pretend that this area is way more populated than it is. And that said, this has a decent sized cast by Doctor Who standards. They actually fill out the Happiness Patrol with a decent number of people. On the one occasion that they do a proper crowd-ish scene, it's not bad by Doctor Who standards. And they have a pretty good amount of people running around in these sort of goblin-esque masks, which also honestly don't look great, and I'm not sure added much to the proceedings. But they are stretching their very clear limitations. But I also got to talk about some of the moments with the Seventh Doctor. So, like, I fairly recently redid my ranking of the Doctors, and he's now up to number 2 for me. He is really good, and there are moments in here that absolutely capture why he is so good. I love that he is so casual and offhanded so much of the time until he turns on a dime and you realize, oh yeah, this is not him just bumbling his way through. Now, audience, if you know him at all, you know that's coming, but it's still really rewarding to see. To see him just casually stroll by and grab something that he's going to use later and like even draw attention, not like sneaky pocketed, like, oh, thank you, and just walk off with something. Or, the moments where he takes a stand and he gets smug because he knows he's already won. His plan is not done falling into place, but he knows. He knows he's on top of this. And it's a smugness that honestly in many ways would be more fitting for a villain. But he gets these moments of it, and it's like, oh, he's getting ready to take this entire thing down, and I cannot wait to see it. But there's one moment in particular where he confronts a couple of snipers who had been watching over and preparing to shoot into a crowd that has, they just barely dispersed. How convenient for filming purposes. But he goes up and he confronts them. One of them threatens to shoot him, and he just goes so cold. He said, do it. Basically pushing this guy and saying, look, you say you're going to do it, so do it. And the guy can't.
I can't.
Why not?
I don't know.
You don't, do you?
For as much as he is trying to be what this system tells him he's supposed to be, looking someone dead in the eye who's just standing there, who isn't a threat to him. He can't do it. And the doctor knew he wouldn't be able to do it. And again, that kind of smug darkness where he is dead serious. He's not laughing, but there is a certainty that borders on smugness, even as he goes real dark and real cold. And he gets a look in his eye in scenes like that where it's like, oh, okay. See, this is why of all the doctors, you are kind of scary. And like, various doctors can be scary. I'm sure a lot of people will point to things like David Tennant and the Time Lord Victorious. But the thing is, for that, or even like Eccleston really losing his cool at the Dalek in Dalek, those are intense moments and those are a bit scary. But they're generally one-offs. This is something that we see from the Seventh Doctor on a semi-regular basis. And it's just, oh, it's chills. It's chills every time. And there's also some brilliant dark humor in this, which is honestly another thing that I really appreciate about the Seventh Doctor's era. There were definitely some stumbling blocks early on when he first came in and the humor was a little bit heavy-handed. They kind of played him off a little too goofy. But by this point, they know how to run this line of humor, a very dark humor through it, but is pretty consistent across the board. It keeps coming out. I kept finding myself laughing out loud at these moments, including a moment towards the very end in regards to how the leader of this planet ends up being left behind. She had an escape plan. It does not get to happen. And the interaction, it's not even with the doctor. I don't want to spoil it if you haven't seen it. But the little interaction that happens with the people who are on the shuttle that she's not on, but she intended to be, incredibly humorous. But also, again, at points very dark. She is defeated. She is effectively removed from power. But the final moments with her are not kind. And I don't mean like she gets physically brutalized. I mean, given what this person espouses, what she says she wants for herself, for this planet, for whoever is under her domain, what can we do to her that fundamentally shatters everything she says she wants and everything she says she is? That is the approach that is taken, and that's what I mean by brutal. I don't mean physically brutal. I mean, what can we do to you that is antithetical to everything that you have been doing and the name of it that you have saying you do all this in the name of everyone should be happy all the time. What can we do to you to tear you down from that position as far as possible? And that's what happens. There's so many things across this, so many wonderful little moments, these little interactions when certain members of the Happiness Patrol start to turn on each other, but even with that, often still reciting the mantras, I'm glad. Well, I'm happy you're glad. Well, I'm glad you're happy. Then, and just how ingrained this is, even in the people who are starting to wonder and starting to push back on it, but also how easy it is to get these people to turn on each other because it's about ideological purity. So the instant you are not ideologically pure and being exactly what you are supposed to be, everybody turns on you right away. And also, there's a harmonica player. There's some great harmonica in this. Now, I just love harmonica, but I love like melancholic harmonica. There's a fair bit of it in here. It's not like, well, I was gonna say it's not important. It actually kind of is. But it's not like the most important thing going on. It does actually add to the theming, though, and I just like having it. So I'm just going to shout it out and point it out there. I think if you have avoided this because you saw the Candyman and went, nope, you are doing yourself a disservice. This is really good. Happiness Patrol. Have you seen it? What do you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon is what pays the bills around here. Any amount you are able to support is greatly appreciated. And while I will sometimes pick a classic Who episode that is fitting to something going on. I do also have votes to help with the patrons to help me determine what future Classic Who I'm going to do. So you want to take part in that? That's a perk at any support level. But not too much pressure about that. Like, share, subscribe also help me out. But ultimately, I try and take a relaxed attitude around here. So you can just come on back next time you need a break. And credits, that means I need to shout out my top patron supporters. Robin Moore, Zupin Lutfula, Tarak, the thing that goes doink in the anime, Oliver B., Linda Walters, Emu Delkey, Leotha Boyd, Toy Loli, Becky Sparks, Renabi Likes the Poodle, Zach, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Casperl, Adam RDL Taylor, Shay Legurle, Brendan LaRose, and TT. Thank you so much for your support. You can get your name in the credits too by checking out the rewards on the Patreon. You only tried to eat my earring once this time. That's much better.